"Mommy's sick, but she'll still smile if you come to my party," the little girl said to the man in the suit. The wind whispered through the bare trees, carrying with it the faint crunch of dry leaves skittering across cracked pavement. In a small, forgotten park tucked behind a row of aging apartment buildings, James Crane sat alone on a weathered bench, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection, his black leather shoes immaculately polished. Yet nothing about him looked whole. His shoulders slumped forward slightly, and his fingers clutched a lukewarm paper cup of coffee, like it was the only thing anchoring him to the present. It had been 6 years to the day. He had just come from the cemetery. The marble headstone bearing his daughter's name still gleamed, untouched by the dirt and neglect of the world around it. He had left white roses, her favorite, though she never got old enough to say it with certainty. There had been no ceremony, no guests, just him and the silence he had grown too used to. He stared blankly ahead, lost in a fog of what-ifs and regret. That was when he felt it, the sensation of being watched. A soft shuffle on the concrete drew his eyes to a small figure standing a few feet away, a little girl no older than 3, with tousled blonde hair and a faded blue dress, clutched a tiny cloth bag against her chest. Her shoes did not match, one red, one pink, and her cheeks were smudged with what might have been chocolate or dirt, but her eyes were clear, wide, and fixed on him. "Are you sad too, mister?" she asked, her voice light and curious, like a question about the weather. James blinked, taken aback. "What makes you think that?" She pointed, matter of fact. "Because you're sitting alone, like me." That hit harder than it should have. "And why are you alone, sweetheart?" The girl's expression turned serious. "It's my birthday today. Mommy's sick, but she'll still smile if you come to my party." James stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He had faced boardrooms, billion-dollar acquisitions, cutthroat negotiations, but he had no defense for this. He glanced around. A few kids played in the distance, none paying attention. Behind them, a row of brick apartments loomed, worn and tired. I don't think I should intrude," he said carefully, starting to rise. But her tiny hand reached out, tugging at the sleeve of his coat with surprising firmness. Her voice this time was softer. "Please? I saved candies from school for this." James looked down at her, at the seriousness in her young eyes, the kind that should never exist in someone so small, and felt something crack. He had not celebrated a birthday in years, not even his own. The last one he attended was in a hospital room, his daughter too weak to blow out the candles. She had whispered, "It's okay, Daddy, we can pretend." This little girl was pretending too. He nodded slowly. "All right then. Lead the way, birthday girl." Her face lit up like sunrise breaking through a storm. She reached for his hand without hesitation, and he let her take it. Her fingers were cold but steady. As they walked, she chattered about the drawings she made, how Mommy was resting, how the other kids had gone home, but it was still a party because she had her candies and now she had a guest. He listened, more present than he had been in years. Up ahead, the buildings loomed closer. A curtain fluttered in a second-story window. Somewhere, a dog barked. He realized for the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about business, or loss, or himself. He was just following a child who had seen his sadness before he even spoke, and for reasons he could not explain, that made him feel human again. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and old paint. James followed the little girl up 2 flights of creaky stairs, her small hand still wrapped around his. She skipped with purpose, humming softly under her breath as they reached a faded blue door with the number 2C barely clinging to the wood. She knocked, twice, gently, then pushed the door open without hesitation. "Mommy, I brought someone." James hesitated at the threshold. The room beyond was dimly lit, a yellow bulb flickering weakly above a tiny kitchen sink. The walls were stained with age, one corner patched with cardboard. The couch near the window sagged in the middle. On it lay a woman, frail, blonde, and pale. Natalie. At the sound of her daughter's voice, she stirred, coughing lightly as she turned her head. When she saw James, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored coat, her body tensed. Her eyes darted between the man and her child. Confusion flashed, then concern. She struggled to sit up, pushing herself up on shaky elbows, but her body betrayed her. Her arm gave out, and she nearly slid back down before catching herself with a wince. James instinctively stepped forward, hands raised in apology. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. She invited me to a party." Natalie blinked rapidly, clearly trying to process what was happening. Her voice, when it came, was raspy but composed. "You came with her?" He nodded. "She found me in the park, said today's her birthday." A beat passed. Natalie looked at her daughter, now bustling around the tiny living room, spreading out napkins and setting two mismatched teacups on a folding table, then back at James. There was still a flicker of fear in her eyes, of the unknown, of a stranger in her home, but something in his expression seemed to calm her. She gave a tired, half smile. "Well, in that case, welcome." James stepped inside slowly, taking in the room. It was small and clearly worn down, but clean in its own way. A shelf held a few picture books and a battered teddy bear missing one ear. Crayon drawings were taped proudly to the fridge and walls. One showed a smiling stick figure family with a bright sun above. No cake, no balloons, just hope, clinging by threads. The girl was still busy preparing. "I'll get the candies. Wait right here, mister." Natalie watched her daughter, then looked down at her own lap. A cannula ran beneath her nose, connected to a portable oxygen tank beside the couch. "I wasn't expecting guests," she said softly, her voice tinged with apology. James offered a gentle smile. "Honestly, I didn't think I'd be at a party today either, but your daughter insisted, and I've been to 100 events that called themselves parties. None felt this honest." Natalie exhaled, and some tension left her shoulders. "She does that," she said, gesturing to the child now climbing on a chair to reach a high shelf. "She makes you feel like you're the most important person in the room." James watched her with quiet admiration. "She's extraordinary." There was a pause, then Natalie glanced toward him. "She saved those candies from school all week. Said she didn't want to eat them until she had someone to share them with on her birthday." James looked down at the floor, suddenly struggling to find words. "She told me her mom promised her cake," he murmured. Natalie's smile faltered. Her eyes grew glassy, but she held them steady. "I did. I was going to," she whispered, "before I got worse." James turned to face her more fully. "You do not owe me an explanation." Natalie shook her head slowly. "I owe her. She's 3. She doesn't understand what it means when I cannot get out of bed for days, or why her daddy never came home after that scaffolding fell. She just wants candles and someone to say happy birthday." James looked at the child again, who was now carefully unwrapping 3 tiny hard candies and placing them on a plastic plate. "She got all 3, he said. Candles, and someone to say it." Natalie's eyes welled up. She nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. Then, gathering the last of her strength, she straightened her back and said with grace, "Well then, mister, let's not keep the birthday girl waiting." The little girl returned, clutching her cloth bag like it held something sacred. She walked with deliberate steps, her face full of pride and ceremony. James watched her as she knelt beside the small table and carefully opened the bag. "I brought the good ones," she said, her voice bright. Her tiny fingers, sticky at the tips, unwrapped 3 colorful pieces of candy, one red, one green, one blue, and placed them gently on a faded paper plate. The cartoon animals on it were worn and smudged, but the care in her hands made them feel precious. James slowly lowered himself to the floor, folding his coat neatly beside him. Sitting cross-legged, he reached for the green candy and held it between his fingers as if he had never seen anything more valuable. "Thank you," he said sincerely. She smiled proudly. "That one's minty. Mommy says it's good for your breath." He chuckled, surprised by the sound of his own laughter, soft, genuine, and long absent from his life. Natalie watched quietly from the couch, her body leaning back into the cushions, one hand pressed lightly over her chest. Her daughter's smile had returned, full and unburdened, and for the first time in weeks, the fatigue around Natalie's eyes seemed to soften. "Okay," the little girl said, taking a breath. "I'm going to sing now." James sat up straighter, hands in his lap. "We're ready." She closed her eyes and folded her hands, as if preparing for a ceremony. Her voice was light and trembling. "Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me." But on the final line, her voice faltered. Her eyes drifted to the plate. There was no cake, no candle, just candy and silence. Still, she smiled, lifting her chin slightly. "Now I'll blow out the air," she said. She leaned forward and exhaled gently over the plate. No flame, no smoke, just the sound of her breath, soft and determined. Natalie's lips trembled, her throat tightened. She blinked hard, but a tear slipped through anyway. James swallowed, the moment catching him off guard. It was so simple, so pure, it broke past all the years of silence he had built up around himself. Then the little girl turned to him and asked in a whisper, "Mister, do you think wishes come true without candles?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver lighter. It was old, the initials worn but still legible. He looked around, spotted a toothpick in a cup near the sink, snapped it in half, lit the tip, and held it up in front of her. "Only," he said softly, "if someone else lights it for you." The girl's eyes widened. "It's a real flame?" He smiled. "Make your wish, princess." She leaned in, cheeks puffed, and blew gently. The small flame vanished in an instant. The room grew dim again, but the glow it left behind lingered. Then, silently, James reached into his bag again. He took out a mechanical pencil, opened it carefully, and used the plastic casing to fashion a tiny, makeshift candle. He stuck it upright in the center of the plate. Without speaking, he handed the lighter to Natalie. She hesitated. Her eyes moved between James and her daughter. Her hand trembled slightly as she flicked the lighter once, twice, until the tiny flame sprang to life again. She lit the improvised candle. The girl clapped in delight. "It's a birthday now? A real one?" James grinned. "Happy birthday." Natalie let out a laugh, fragile, airy. It turned into a cough, but she did not cover her face. Instead, she let herself laugh through it. A tear rolled down her cheek. She made no effort to wipe it away. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked at her. "Believe it. It's happening." Natalie covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "I haven't seen her this happy since before the diagnosis." James held her gaze, steady and kind. "Sometimes," he said, "all it takes is a spark." Natalie looked down at her daughter, now pretending to pour invisible tea and serve candy like it was the most elegant dessert in the world. "No cake," she whispered, "but everything she needed." James nodded quietly. "And maybe everything we needed too." The next morning, James sat in the glass-walled boardroom of Crane Holdings, the skyline of the city stretching behind him like a kingdom he had long since stopped admiring. Men and women in tailored suits spoke in clipped tones about projections, profits, permits, and a planned demolition that would make room for a new high-rise. He barely heard them. His mind wasn't in the room. It was 3 miles away, in a dim apartment where a little girl had sung happy birthday to herself over 3 candies, and a woman with tired eyes had smiled through pain just to see her daughter laugh. When the meeting turned to the East Side clearance proposal, codename Project Haven, James lifted his hand. "I want it paused," he said. Chatter fell silent, heads turned. "We have not completed a full impact study," he added, his voice steady. "We are displacing families, people. I want a revised plan before we proceed." "But Mr. Crane," one executive began. "I said pause it." He left the room before the murmurs started again. That afternoon he returned to apartment 2C. The hallway looked the same, aged, tired, but he carried something different this time. A small box containing a cupcake with pink frosting, 3 tiny birthday candles, and a worn comic book wrapped in brown paper. When the door opened, Natalie stood there, leaning on the frame. She had managed to change into a clean shirt, and her blonde hair was brushed, though still tangled at the ends. Her eyes widened. "You really came back?" James lifted the box slightly and smiled. "I said it was a party. I don't like leaving halfway through." She stepped aside without a word, and he entered. The little girl lit up when she saw the cupcake. "Is that for me?" "It is," James said. "This time you get to make a wish with real candles." They sat up at the small table again, Natalie seated with a blanket over her lap, James across from her, and the little girl bouncing in place with excitement. "Can I light them?" she asked. James handed her the lighter. "With help." Natalie reached over gently, guiding her daughter's hand. Together they lit the candles, 3 tiny flames dancing over a too small cupcake, but to the little girl it was a 5-tiered dream. She closed her eyes, whispered a wish only the walls heard, and blew them out with one steady breath. They clapped. She beamed. Afterward, James unwrapped the comic book. "This," he said, "was my daughter's favorite. She never got to finish it, but I think you might like it." He began reading in exaggerated voices, silly and theatrical. The little girl laughed so hard she hiccuped, and even Natalie, watching from the side, let out a real laugh that turned into a cough. "You missed your calling," she said once she caught her breath. "Too many business meetings," James replied with a shrug. Time passed unnoticed as they flipped through pages, snacked on bits of cupcake, and played pretend with broken crayons. As the sun began to dip, casting a golden hue through the grimy window pane, James stood to leave. But something caught his eye, a corner of paint peeling near the frame. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, knelt, and gently wiped at the dust. Then, noticing the coat hook hanging loosely beside the door, he unfastened the old leather strap of his wristwatch, broke it into 2 parts, and used it to tighten the screws and hold the hook firm. Natalie watched from the couch, saying nothing, but her eyes followed every movement. As he straightened up, he pulled a small folded note from his jacket and placed it on the edge of the table. "Next time," he said, "I'll bring tea." Then he turned and left. Natalie reached for the note after the door clicked shut. It was folded in quarters, the handwriting neat and simple. When she opened it, her breath caught. On the back of a bank deposit slip, drawn in crayon, was a picture, clearly by a child's hand. 3 stick figures held hands beneath a sun. 1 tall man in a suit, 1 woman with yellow hair, and 1 little girl with a crown. Below it, scrawled in crooked letters, "Mommy plus me plus Mr. Nice equals happy." Natalie pressed the drawing to her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself hope. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the oxygen machine and the slow rhythmic breathing of the child curled beside her. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the small nightlight casting shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Her fingers gently smoothed the blanket over her daughter's tiny frame, but her thoughts were far from still. She reached to the nightstand and picked up a small glass jar. It had once held strawberry jam. Now it was empty, except for the faint wax mark on the lid, where James had lit that makeshift candle. That light had brought her daughter joy. Now Natalie stared at it like it was a warning flare. She closed her eyes and pulled her notebook from the drawer. It was worn, pages dog-eared, margins scribbled with lesson plans she never got to teach again. Tonight, she wrote something different. "He's kind, too kind. But when this ends, and it always ends, what happens to people like me? What happens to people like me when people like him move on?" She didn't write more. She could not. The next afternoon, James returned with a coloring book and a box of new crayons. He knocked gently and smiled as the door opened. "I brought something for the artist," he said. The little girl squealed, running to grab it from his hands. "Thank you, Mr. James." But Natalie stood farther back, her tone polite, her smile measured. "That's very generous of you, but you really don't have to keep doing this," she said softly, avoiding his eyes. He hesitated. "I want to." She nodded once. "Thank you," she said again, then turned her attention to tidying the counter, creating a polite but unmistakable distance. James lingered for a moment, watching her shoulders tighten, then quietly excused himself. That night, he stood in the center of a grand ballroom with a drink in hand and a glass smile on his face. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above him. Laughter bounced off marble walls. Suits and gowns mingled. Deals were whispered over hors d'oeuvres. But James could not remember the name of the man talking beside him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen lit up with a photo, the drawing the little girl had made. "Mommy plus me plus Mr. Nice equals happy." His hand tightened around the glass. He set it down, untouched. He left without saying goodbye. The next day, he returned to the east side, the same path he had walked twice before. But this time, as he stepped through the iron gate leading to the apartments, a voice stopped him. An older man, gray-stubbled and wearing a cap, stood near the steps, arms crossed. "You're from the company, right?" the man asked, eyes sharp. James nodded. "Crane Holdings." The man's voice hardened. "People like you buy buildings like these and kick us out. Then you tear everything down and forget we were ever here." James looked at him. No suits, no cameras, just a man defending the only place he called home. "You're right," James said quietly. "That happens, too often." The man seemed surprised by the honesty. James continued, his voice steady. "But maybe I'm here to remember." A long silence stretched between them. Then the man stepped aside. James climbed the stairs. From the second-floor window, Natalie had watched the entire exchange. She had been folding laundry, what little they had left clean, and paused when she saw him arrive. She had expected him to explain himself, to defend his visits, or maybe she had expected him to walk away. But he had stayed, had listened, had admitted what no man in his position ever would. When James knocked on the door, Natalie opened it without hesitation. There was a softness in her face he had not seen before. "Come in," she said, her voice warm but quiet. "She's been asking about you all morning." James smiled, stepping inside. The little girl ran to him, crayons in hand, already babbling about a new drawing. Natalie leaned against the doorframe, watching them. She did not know what this was, or how long it would last. But for the first time, she let herself believe it might be real. The power went out across the east side just after sunset. Streetlights blinked once, then failed. A wave of darkness rolled down the block, swallowing every window and hallway in shadows. In apartment 2C, Natalie lit a candle, its flame flickering uncertainly on the kitchen counter. Her daughter sat curled on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. Then came a knock. Natalie opened the door to find James standing there with a flashlight in one hand and a tote bag slung over his shoulder. "You really came," she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Even in the dark?" James smiled. "That's when tea tastes best." From the tote, he pulled out a small pack of shortbread cookies, a thermos of warm water, and a brand new set of pink plastic teacups. Within minutes, they sat cross-legged on the floor. The only light came from the flashlight, angled upward to bounce off the ceiling, casting soft rays across their faces and long shadows on the walls. "Tonight," Natalie announced, "we have a special guest at the royal tea table." She looked at her daughter, who squealed in delight. "Mr. James is the knight." "What kind of knight?" he asked with a grin. "The kind who brings cookies," she declared proudly. Natalie laughed. "Then he's the rarest kind." They took turns telling stories. Natalie began with a tale of a lonely princess who lived in a tower made of blankets. James picked up the thread, describing a knight who carried a beam of light instead of a sword, and who found her not by accident, but by promise. The little girl giggled with every twist, her eyes wide, her hands fluttering in excitement, as she added her own silly ideas. Together they called it The Sick Princess and the Knight with the Light. Time passed softly, gently. Natalie's laughter came easier now, not fought through pain. James watched her, how her eyes sparkled in the dark, how her daughter rested against her side with complete trust. Eventually, the little girl's energy gave way to sleep. Her head slipped into Natalie's lap, her breathing slowing. The flashlight buzzed faintly as its battery wore down. In the fading light, Natalie leaned her back against the wall, her voice lower now. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of getting used to this, to you, and then losing all of it." James didn't answer right away. He looked at the woman beside him, the weight she carried, the walls she still held up, even in moments like this. "So am I," he said finally. "But maybe this is the first thing I don't want to lose." They sat in silence. The moment needed no explanation. Later, as Natalie lifted her daughter gently and carried her toward the bed, something slipped from the girl's hand. A crayon drawing, fresh and messy, fluttered to the floor. Natalie picked it up. The image was simple, her lying in bed, surrounded by darkness. A small candle burned in the corner, and beside it a figure holding a light, a stick figure version of James, drawn with extra big hands. She stared at it. "She must have drawn it earlier," she said softly. "She's stronger than she looks," James said, standing beside her. Natalie looked up. "Just like you." She did not respond with words. Instead, she reached out, and for the first time, her fingers closed gently around his. It was not a romantic gesture, not yet. It was something purer, more vulnerable, a quiet surrender of fear, if only for one night. James did not speak. He just held her hand and let the silence wrap around them. The flashlight dimmed to a faint glow. The candle flickered, casting soft patterns across the wall. In that dark apartment with no power, no safety net, and no promises for tomorrow, they sat together. No declarations, no expectations, just the sound of breathing, the warmth of joined hands, and the fragile hope that maybe not everything good had to end. The scream shattered the morning silence. James was already awake, sitting by the window in his apartment, sipping bitter coffee when the call came. "She's not waking up," the nurse said. "The little girl dialed 911 herself. Your number was the only one she remembered." He was already grabbing his keys before she finished. By the time he reached the hospital, the emergency room buzzed under dim fluorescent light, casting everything in cold blue. Natalie lay unconscious in the ICU, hooked to machines that hissed and beeped in a slow, eerie rhythm. Her skin was pale, her breaths shallow. A nurse adjusted her IV, then stepped aside. James entered the room without speaking. His face was tight, jaw clenched against everything he could not control. He sat at the edge of the bed and reached out, brushing a stray hair from Natalie's forehead. His hands trembled as he removed his jacket and carefully draped it over her legs. Behind him, soft footsteps padded across the linoleum. The little girl, wrapped in a too-big sweater, clutched her stuffed bear. She stopped at the door, watching him. James turned, offered her a small smile, but she did not return it. Instead, she slowly walked to the foot of the bed, knelt beside her stuffed bear, and unzipped her pink coat. She folded it carefully and placed it over the bear. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "He's cold, too." James felt something catch in his throat. In that moment, no boardroom, no billion-dollar deal, no penthouse view could mean more than this. A girl trying to share warmth, a man clinging to hope, a woman fighting for breath. Later that day, the doctor called James into a private consultation room. The verdict was grim. "We've done all we can. Her immune system's collapsing. We need a bone marrow match, urgently. But the list is long, months, maybe more." James sat in silence, then spoke just once. "Test me." The nurse blinked. "Mr. Crane, it's test me." The results came in 48 hours later. He was a match. He did not tell Natalie. He did not tell anyone. He signed the consent, cleared his schedule, and prepared for the donation without fanfare or announcement. He just showed up. The procedure left him sore, aching in ways he hadn't expected. But when he saw her, a day later, awake and sitting up, barely, but alive, it did not matter. Natalie looked up as he entered her room. Her daughter was asleep in a chair beside the bed, arms wrapped around the same stuffed bear. "You?" she said, her voice hoarse but sharp. James smiled faintly. "Me." "I heard," she rasped. "You did it, didn't you?" He didn't deny it. He pulled up a chair, sat down beside her. "You can't just fix everything," she said, more angry than grateful. "You cannot throw yourself into my life and expect—" "I'm not fixing," James interrupted. "I'm choosing." She stared at him, eyes tired, still clouded by medication and fear, but fierce. He leaned forward, his voice low, steady. "You gave me a reason to feel again, to remember what it's like to care about something that's not tied to money or image or legacy. I didn't do this to rescue you, Natalie. I did this because I don't want to imagine the world without you in it." There was silence between them. Only the beeping of the heart monitor filled the space. Then slowly, Natalie's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, not from pain, but from something deeper. She tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, her fingers reached across the blanket, weak but searching. James met her halfway, gently wrapping her hand in his. They didn't speak again. They just sat there, hand in hand, as the machines continued to hum and the fluorescent lights flickered above them. And in that small, sterile room, something fragile and quiet bloomed. Not salvation, not a fairy tale ending, but something real, a choice, a life not promised, but still worth fighting for. The backyard was small, but it had never looked more magical. Streamers fluttered in the breeze, tied between the crooked posts of a weathered fence. Paper lanterns swayed overhead, casting soft golden glows as dusk approached. Children ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter echoing under the wide-open sky. A table stood at the center, covered with a pastel cloth, plates of cupcakes, juice boxes, and, at its heart, a single round cake, covered in white frosting, with 4 pink candles waiting to be lit. Natalie stood beside it, smiling. Her hair had grown back in soft, golden waves that brushed her shoulders. She wore a pale blue dress, nothing extravagant, but it brought out the color in her eyes. She moved slowly, still recovering, but every step was hers. James stood at her side, holding the birthday cake carefully as their little girl twirled in front of them, her dress a flurry of ruffles and sparkle. She was 4 now. A crown sat crooked on her head, plastic, glittering, and perfect. "Princess!" James called out. "Your royal cake is ready." The girl skipped over, hands clasped together in anticipation. James knelt, balancing the cake as Natalie lit the candles. Around them, the crowd quieted. Friends, neighbors, even some of James's colleagues who had finally understood why their boss had changed so much in the past year. But in that moment, there were only 3 people that mattered. The little girl leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in her wide eyes. Before she blew them out, she leaned toward James and whispered, "You were my first candle." He paused. Then he smiled, genuine, deep. He leaned in and whispered back, "And you were my first light." She blew out the candles with one big puff, laughter bubbling from her chest as the crowd clapped and cheered. James stood, setting the cake down, but his eyes never left the girl or her mother. Natalie reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. She looked at him, not as a man who had given her back her health, or bought her gifts, or stayed longer than anyone else ever had, but as someone who had chosen her every day since. No contracts, no conditions, just love. A song played from a small speaker. Children danced and parents mingled, but at the center of it all stood the 3 of them, once broken in different ways, now whole in the only way that mattered. They were a family. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows over the yard, James lifted the little girl into his arms. "Did you make a wish?" he asked. She nodded. "What was it?" She leaned close again, lips to his ear. "I wished that we could stay like this forever." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "We already are," he said. Natalie joined them, wrapping her arms around both. And there, under the fading light and soft glow of lanterns, they stood. Just a woman who had fought to stay alive, a man who had learned how to live again, and the little girl who had lit the way for them both. They closed their eyes, and together they breathed in the candle's smoke, the laughter around them, and the gentle, undeniable truth. Sometimes, the smallest birthday party becomes the beginning of everything. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If this story moved you, even just a little, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories for more real, emotional tales that remind us of what truly matters: love, compassion, and the quiet strength of human connection. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might just change your day or your life. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.